Okay, My America as Far as I Can See, Meg's Prairie Diary during the cholera epidemic of 1848 to 1850. June 2nd, 1856. I can see Kansas City in the distance. Press and I have our cases packed. Dr. Bayer said when the boat docks he will hurry off to buy supplies, as he has heard that they sell out fast. Press and I are to stay on board until the pushing and shoving are over. Then we are to walk down the plank and wait for Dr. Bayer beside the boat. Dr. Bayer says we will stay in a hotel tonight. After 6 days on the Kansas Hopeful, I'm ready for a bath. I long for fresh towels and clean sheets. Later, Press and I are sitting on our trunks on the dock. Beside me is the tub with the baby apple trees. They are a bit wilted from being below. Kansas City looks nothing like a city. The street is hardly more than a dirt path. It's lined with overloaded wagons heading west out of town. Press counted 18 mules pulling one wagon. A herd of cattle just thundered by. I must go grab onto Preston so he won't dash off and be trampled by a cow. Later, the yellow-haired gambler loaded his wagon with all sorts of cases. Press says the big cases must hold rifles, and the small ones pistols. Then his mule team pulled his wagon away. Miss Peach and Hannah hugged us goodbye. They have hired a Mexican driver to take them to Neosho. Hannah asked us to come visit them. Miss Peach said amen to that. Then they drove off. Everyone has gone now, everyone but Press and me. We are still sitting on our trunks. Evening. Dr. Bayer came at last. He said it was not easy to buy supplies in a frontier town. We began looking for a hotel, but they all had signs that said no vacancy. Finally, we got a place at Griggs Hotel. It was shabby and very crowded, but Dr. Bayer said it was the best we could do. We sat down to a supper of boiled cabbage. It smelled awful, but there was nothing else, so we ate it. Dr. Bayer said, "Hunger is the best sauce." Night. We do not even have a room in this awful hotel. Only 3 cots in a hallway. As we came upstairs, a woman shouted, "Don't put your shoes and stockings on the floor, or the rats will carry them off." My feet are drawn up on my cot. Downstairs, fiddlers are playing. People are stomping and dancing and shouting, "Yahoo!" I said to Press, "I cannot wait to leave this hotel." Press said, "Amen to that." June 3rd, 1856. I didn't sleep a wink. I heard little claws scratching all night long, but we waited until sunup to leave, for we did not want to step on a rat in the dark. Good riddance to Griggs Hotel. Morning. I'm sitting in a small space in the back of an open wagon, writing as we go. Preston is sitting next to Dr. Bayer on the driver's seat. The wagon is a big wooden box on wheels. It is packed with supplies and furniture that Dr. Bayer had sent ahead. Our trunks are squeezed in too, and so is the tub with Mother's baby apple trees. Dr. Bayer bought us hats to keep off the sun. Press's hat is a small man's hat. He loves it. Mine is a sunbonnet. The brim is nearly as long as my arm. What if someone should see me in such an unfashionable bonnet? I shall never wear it. Our wagon is pulled by 2 oxen, also known as Ruby and Blanco. Ruby is red. Blanco is nearly white. They sway as they walk. So does my writing. It is 40 miles to Aunt Margaret's house. Dr. Bayer says he hopes to make the trip in 4 days. Later. Tall prairie grass grows as far as I can see. I feel as if we are traveling over a beautiful green tablecloth. The wind blows through the grass with a lonesome whistling sound. I never knew the sky could be so big. Later. I never knew the sun could be so hot. Afternoon. I have put on the bonnet. The shade feels heavenly, and no one will see me in it anyway. So far, we have passed only one dead, swollen cow by the side of the trail. Poor creature. Later, Dr. Bayer says we are traveling through Delaware Indian Territory. Prez is keen to see a Delaware, but Dr. Bayer says that they are probably hunting farther west this time of the year. Later, we have stopped by a stream in the shade of some oaks. Dr. Bayer tied ropes to Ruby and Blanco. The other end of each rope is attached to a spike called a picket. Dr. Bayer hammered the pickets into the ground. Now, Ruby and Blanco can nibble grass in a wide circle. Dr. Bayer spread a cloth on the grass. He set out jam and biscuits. I picked a bunch of blue flowers. Dr. Bayer put them in water in his tin cup and set the cup on our cloth. This is what he calls a picnic. Press is chasing little jumping bugs. Dr. Bayer says they are grasshoppers. I still love smoky St. Louis, but my, this air smells sweet. Bedtime. We found out something about Dr. Bayer tonight. Something so sad. We were sitting around the campfire. Preston suddenly bounced into Dr. Bayer's lap. He hugged him. Then he asked why he had no children. I started to scold Press, but Dr. Bayer said he didn't mind answering. He told us that he once had a wife and 3 daughters. They all died in the same cholera epidemic that killed Lee and Larry. Tears came into his eyes as he spoke. Tears came into my eyes, too. I felt bad for Dr. Bayer, and I worried for Mother and Grace. Dr. Bayer said his house was once full of girls and laughter and the rustle of petticoats. Now the house is still. Dr. Bayer said he's moving to Kansas because he no longer wants to wake up in an empty house. Press hugged Dr. Bayer again. I went over and hugged him too. We thanked our bear for watching over us on our journey. Wolves are howling now. Dr. Bayer says they are far away. I will try to believe him. June 4, 1856. Press and I helped Dr. Bayer unload the wagon last night. We covered the supplies with an oilskin cloth. Then we climbed into the wagon box. We rolled up in Indian blankets and fell asleep under the stars. Sometimes in the night it started to rain. I scooted down in my blanket like a turtle in its shell. This morning I discovered that Press had crawled under the wagon to stay dry. When he crawled out this morning, he was covered with mud. He said he liked mud. It was all I could do to get him to change into a clean shirt and trousers. The trail was so muddy from the rain that our wagon wheels got stuck. Ruby and Blanco couldn't pull us out, so Press and I got behind the wagon. We pushed with all our might. Dr. Bayer pulled from the front with the oxen. At last, the wheels began to turn. They splattered us with mud, but we cheered anyway, just as when the Kansas hopeful came off of the sandbar. Preston's clean, dry clothes are now wet and muddy. My blue linen dress is mud brown, but we shall stay dressed as we are, for we will only get muddier this day. Mother would say we are all a disgrace. Later, 2 men on horseback came up behind us on the trail. They had rifles slung over their saddles. They stopped to talk with us. They said they were from Georgia. They asked where we came from. Dr. Bayer was not at all friendly. He said only that we were from Missouri. This answer seemed to satisfy them, and they went on their way. When they were gone, Dr. Bayer frowned. He said the men were border ruffians. They and others like them are coming to Kansas to vote. They will vote for Kansas to become a state that allows slavery. Then they will go home again. I asked why men from Georgia cared so much about Kansas. Dr. Bayer said they do not care about Kansas, but they care about slavery. They want as many states as possible to allow slavery. That way, they think the United States will never pass laws against it. I think border ruffians are what Dr. Bayer meant when he said Kansas could be dangerous. Later, it was too windy to start a fire tonight, so we had soda biscuits for supper. They were as hard as rocks. June 5, 1856. The mosquitoes are fierce. Press and I are covered with bites. We passed a pair of covered wagons on the side of the trail today. A man said they were stopping just long enough for a baby to be born. This evening, Press and I gathered dry prairie grass. Dr. Bayer used it to start a campfire. He fed it with wood he gathered when we had our picnic under the oaks. He set up 2 forked sticks on either side of the fire. He ran a long branch through the handle of an iron kettle. Then he laid the branch on the forks of the sticks. In this way, he hung the kettle over the fire. Dr. Bear poured water into the kettle. I helped him cut up carrots and potatoes. Press plopped them into the water. Then Dr. Bear added dried herbs, parsley, thyme, and rosemary. He says that herbs are the secret to vegetarian cooking. Before long, a wonderful smell rose from the kettle, but when it was time to serve the soup, I came too close to the fire. The wind blew ash onto the hem of my rose-colored silk. It is burned with many tiny holes. In spite of this, the dinner was delicious. My lilac silk dress is stained with soup. My blue linen is covered in mud, and now my rose-colored silk is burnt. Soon I shall have nothing to wear. June 6, 1856. We reached the Kaw River this morning. Dr. Bayer drove the wagon onto a ferry boat and it carried us across the river. We saw buildings in the distance. The ferry driver said that this is Lawrence. He said there had been fighting in the town, and the border ruffians had burned down the hotel. Later, Dr. Bear says we're almost there. I am all nerves now. I have on my cream silk, my last clean dress. I have brushed my hair and braided it. I want to look my best when I see Aunt Margaret. Bedtime. We are in Aunt Margaret and Uncle Albert's cabin. Too tired to write more. June 7, 1856. Father's letter never arrived. We drove up to a log cabin yesterday at sunset. Aunt Margaret and Uncle Albert came out to see who their visitors were. They had no idea we were coming. Tears sprang to Aunt Margaret's eyes when she saw Press and me. She and Uncle Albert were sad to learn the reason for our coming, but they are glad to have us. Aunt Margaret says she is happy to have another female with her way out here on the prairie. Aunt Margaret looks like Mother, but her hands, they are as red and chapped as Nellie's. Dr. Bayer put Ruby and Blanco on picket ropes to feed. He and Uncle Albert unloaded our things from the wagon. We went into the log cabin. The walls are covered with newspapers. Cousin George, who is 12, says this keeps out the dust. The cabin is small, not bigger than our carriage house back home. George seems proud that it has a real door and 2 glass windows, and that part of the floor is covered with a rug of braided rags. The cabin is a square. It has a fireplace. An oven stands in a corner. They call this corner the kitchen. Shelves on the wall serve for a pantry. A quilt hangs from the rafters. Behind it is Aunt Margaret and Uncle Albert's bed. George and Charlie and John sleep in the loft, and that is all there is of the cabin. Aunt Margaret fixed us corn cakes and bacon for supper. I offered to set the table. Then I looked around. There was no table. Aunt Margaret laughed. She picked up her wash tub from where it hung on the wall. She set it upside down on the floor. That was our table. We sat around it on overturned buckets. We ate on tin plates. Aunt Margaret said that every bit of her china broke on the way to Kansas. Uncle Albert said that for now I will sleep on a bed of prairie feathers. He sent Charlie and John out to get a big load of hay. They piled half of it on the floor. Aunt Margaret laid 2 quilts on top. Then the boys piled the rest of the hay onto the quilts. I crawled between the 2 quilts. The hay smelled so sweet. It was as snug as a real feather bed. Press scrambled up the ladder to sleep in the loft with his cousins. Charlie is 8. John is 6. Press is 7, so he fits right between them. I fell asleep listening to chirping crickets and to the low sounds of grown-ups talking. Uncle Aubert talked of owning land. Dr. Beyer talked of voting to make Kansas a free state. Aunt Margaret said it was a great pity that women could not vote in elections. This morning, Press and I hugged our dear bear goodbye, and then Ruby and Blanco took him off to Neosho and the vegetarians. Later, I have written to Mother and Father. Uncle Aubert will take my letter to Lawrence. He says it will go out on the next wagon east. Uncle Aubert says he will see whether a letter has come from Father. Press told me he was going with Charlie and John to gather buffalo chips. I wanted to ask what buffalo chips were, but Press ran off too fast. George showed me around outside. Uncle Albert has claimed 160 acres of land. To keep it, he had to build a cabin, and he must farm the land. Behind the log cabin is a small barn. It is made of prairie soil bricks called sod. An ox named Kip and a black and white milk cow called Molly live in the barn. Molly is very fat. George says she will give birth to a calf this summer. There is a stream nearby and a grove of trees. George says this makes it a very good claim. He showed me his father's cornfield. The corn is up to my shoulder now. George showed me Aunt Margaret's garden near the cabin. She's growing potatoes, carrots, watermelons, pumpkins, and squash. The little boys came back from the prairie with 6 flour sacks of buffalo chips, also known as buffalo dung. George told me they dry it in the sacks all summer and then burn it for fuel all winter. I am very thankful that I will not be in Kansas for the winter. Later, we have planted the baby apple trees beside the cabin. We spaced them apart with plenty of room to grow. I dug the holes. Aunt Margaret shook her head at me, digging in my lilac silk. She says she will soon make me a prairie dress. The boys ran down to the creek. They brought back buckets of water and watered the trees. I think Mother would be happy to see part of her garden growing in Kansas. Later, Uncle Aubert came back from Lawrence. There was no letter from Father.